Hey guys, welcome to, I think it's week 3 of our live. As the live is going on, everyone is joining. I'm very excited to have Emily on today. She's joined, so I can add her to the live. Ooh. I hope I can. Oh no. Oh, here we go. I can invite you. I always get this. I'm not very good with Instagram. Hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on our live today.
Oh, okay. If you hear a baby screaming in the background, does everyone mind their business?
Oh no. The timing, it's just like only the days that you really need them to go to bed on time. You're just like...
Literally, he's in bed and I reckon I'm in the clear, but who knows?
Oh, if you need to get off at any time.
Oh no,
please.
my husband's here, so
oh, okay.
Jump in if I need.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I think my daughter's still awake too. My husband's off. Oh, no. I think she might be asleep. I'm not sure. Thank you so much for coming on. Like it's been so great, like doing these lives every week and just bringing someone with information and education for my followers who are mostly autism parents, and they ask me all of these questions and I don't have the answers. So that's why it's been cool to bring in different people and just getting different perspectives, answering questions. So if everyone who is watching at the moment, this is Emily and she is a clinical psychologist. Is it child and adolescent clinical psychologist?
Yeah.
Yes.
With kids and adolescents, but yeah, clinical psychologist.
Nice. And you are the owner of The Playful Psychologist, which I was so excited when you tagged me in something and I was like, wow, such a wealth of information your page is. And I just checked out your website and amazing. So anyone that is watching can ask questions at any time. But I thought that while everyone's joining in on the live, we could debunk a few fun myths that are kind of outrageous. But so the first one is that psychologists can read minds.
God, if I had literally $1 for every time someone was like, "Oh, you're a psychologist," what am I thinking? I'd be able to. No, they can't. I wish they could. It would make our jobs a lot easier, but we can't. Yeah. Sorry.
Although it may seem like sometimes they do.
Yeah.
Right. And next one is psychology is the same as psychiatry. I know I was confused between these two as well.
Yeah, so this is a bit tricky. I think that's where, like, especially if we're talking about medication, sometimes it can get a little bit foggy. But basically, a psychiatrist has a medical degree, whereas a psychologist doesn't. So you can have a psychologist that's a doctor in psychology, but they're not a medical doctor. So even with that doctorate in psychology, they cannot prescribe medication. Only a psychiatrist or a medical doctor can.
Okay. Yeah, and it's so like similar wording, so it's always like a little confusing. I think someone commented, sorry. I'm sure it's coming one day. Remember what that was for?
Probably about prescribing, because they're looking at possibly psychologists being able to further their education and being able to prescribe medication, but it's not happening.
Okay. Do you feel that diagnosis is helpful or harmful to a patient?
Oh, that's a good one. We kind of answered that in a little bit, so hold on to that question. But if I don't, like you want me to ask it again. Yeah.
And another one was you have to lie down on a couch while talking to a psychologist.
I don't even have a couch in my office. I'm like on the floor, bouncing off the walls, especially when you work with kids. I wish it was more lying down, but trust me, it's not.
Although I feel like sometimes Jacob might like respond well to like lying on a couch or something, but he would be like all over the place anyway.
No, it's like lying floor or like lying on a really fluffy rug, that sort of thing can, you know, and I think, you know, if I had a couch in my office, I'd probably be the one sleeping on it more than anyone else. But yeah.
You always see it in the movies. That's why I think it's like
yeah.
a strong myth. And the last one, psychologists must have perfect mental health.
No. They definitely, well, I don't know about all the other psychologists out there, but I would say that I do not have perfect mental health. I think, you know, if someone's saying they have perfect mental health, you can only have that for so long. You know, things happen in life, and psychologists aren't immune to that. I wish they were, but they're not.
Yeah, and I think that was a perfect example in your stories today. You were talking about, sorry, I just had a mind blank.
The Texas shooting.
That's right. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Like, and I didn't even realize that was affecting me until I was like 3 or 4 nights in a row. I was waking up going like, oh, I really need to work on this because this is obviously having an impact on my day-to-day functioning. So for sure.
Yeah. So we might head on straight on into the questions. Do a few of the pre-asked questions, and then if we see ones that are like different, we can answer those as we go. But the question was, would a diagnosis at age 2 be very accurate?
So this was a really good question, and I think this in general, I guess to generalize, yes, because at that age, if we're looking at a 2-year-old, we're most likely using a play-based assessment like the ADOS, and that is quite an accurate assessment. However, what I think is happening, especially now with the rise of the NDIS and having that like early intervention line of funding for kids under 7, is that a lot of provisional diagnoses are being given because you can still access that early intervention funding without a formal diagnosis. You just need to prove that there's a developmental delay in some area in order to access funding, whereas prior to that you did need that formal diagnosis to be able to access any funding. So yes, it can be accurate at age 2, but I don't think we're as desperate to make that conclusion as we were, say, like 5 or 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I think that I get that question a lot, and I've told a lot of people, you know, you can access NDIS without a diagnosis, and it's just always like, oh, really? Like, and no one knows about it unless you speak to someone that knows or a specialist. Yeah. So yeah, it's really cool to cover that for everyone that's watching. And I'll go to another question maybe. So someone said that they were confused. Who can give a formal diagnosis that is recognized by the NDIS?
Mm-hmm. So that is a really good question as well, because I've had personally quite a few people come to me needing a reassessment because an OT or a speechy had done the assessment, and the NDIS is actually now saying, yes, even though a speechy or an OT may have the training to have done ADOS, that the assessment needs to have been done by a psychologist or a pediatrician in order to be, you know, to kind of apply for the NDIS. For me, I think that when we're looking at any developmental diagnoses, most specifically autism and ADHD, we go from a therapy perspective, we look at that from a multidisciplinary approach. So what I mean by that is like a big team of professionals, and I think the same should absolutely be, you know, the case with diagnosis as well. Now, I know that's not always possible. I know that funding can be limited and those assessments can be really, really expensive, but I guess I'm talking ideal world. It would be amazing if everyone could be on board and we'd have this like really multidisciplinary approach. But for the NDIS, then if we're talking about kids, we're more so need a psychologist or a pediatrician to be giving that diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask, does it need to be a clinical psychologist or can it just be any psychologist?
So up until recently, I had no issues with any of my clients who had been diagnosed by a generally registered psychologist obtaining funding. More recently, I have had quite a few referrals come saying, oh no, they told us we needed a clinical psychologist. So for me, I guess that's a little bit, I guess that shows maybe some of the lack of knowledge on the NDIS's part, because during my clinical masters, I didn't learn anything about autism assessments or autism diagnosis. That's all, you know, training that I've done after I've graduated, and that would be the same for any generally registered psychologist as well. So I think it's a little bit disappointing in that regard, that they are now saying only a clinical psych can do it, and that's coming from a clinical psychologist. I just think it's a little bit silly. If you have the training, you should be able to administer the assessment.
Yeah, I think the NDIS is like, it's a whole nother
Yeah.
about, but they can be, you know, nitpicky about things, and you hear different things from different people about the NDIS, so it's just so hard to know like straightforward answers about that. So yeah, it can be hard, I guess. So many comments, good. So good. I had all three when my boys were diagnosed. So yeah, I think when I was speaking to Adina, who is the speech therapist who was on 2 weeks ago, she was saying how, I think someone asked whether she could diagnose or recognize autism, and she said that she could observe it and recognize it, but it would have to go through the team to be officially diagnosed, I think. And I think following on, I guess, for an autism diagnosis, does it have to be an ADOS assessment or any or other diagnostic tools?
Yeah, so that's another really good question. It doesn't have to be an ADOS. I think the ADOS is the most like widely used kind of tool at the moment, but it can be a whole lot of things. You can use the ADIR, which is more like a clinical interview type assessment, typically when we're talking about kids, done with parents. For me, I love, in an ideal world, I love to combine like lots of play observations and ADOS and ADIR and all that sort of stuff. However, of course, I know, again, that's not always possible with finances and that sort of thing. But I do, you know, like I said, in an ideal world, that multidisciplinary approach where we're looking at things from an OT and sensory perspective, and we're looking at things from a speech and language development, and everyone's kind of on board with the diagnosis. But no, to answer that question, it doesn't have to be an ADOS, but I think at the moment, the ADOS is the most widely used.
Mm-hmm. That's the only one I think I've heard of as well. Adina said NDIS changing the goal posts all the time doesn't help anyone.
Oh my God, you're not
wrong. Okay. Maybe we'll answer one of these questions if you're comfortable answering it. What would be your approach to supporting a child with autism and ADHD? What's your top advice for parents?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. I think like it's a little bit difficult to answer in regards to like, obviously every child is so unique in like what the biggest goal is for them and that sort of thing. But I think in general, it would be, if you have a child that has both autism and ADHD, it's kind of recognizing or trying to filter through what behavior you're seeing and what diagnosis it belongs to. Because you know, ADHD and autism tend to overlap on face value. But when we're really looking at, you know, what's what, it comes down to the why. So I like to use the example of like eye contact, for example. So a child with autism may not respond to their name because they don't quite recognize that social cue that when someone calls your name, we look up, we give them eye contact. That eye contact it can be quite uncomfortable for them as well. But with ADHD, they understand the cue, they're just not paying attention long enough to be able to respond to that cue. So I think it really comes down to trying to figure out what's what, and it can be really, really tricky when we have both diagnoses.
It's interesting because like Jacob was recently diagnosed with ADHD, so it's sort of like a new world that I'm navigating as well as a parent. So I've always been with the autism side of things, but now it's just like opened a lot of information, and yeah. Definitely going to be getting on your understanding ADHD course. Yes,
an online workshop, I think, that just kind of like filters through all that information, because as for today with the reel I posted, I think ADHD is very misunderstood. So that was the hope for that workshop.
Yeah, it's like blowing up on social media at the moment, I think. From what I can see. We'll go for another question. Is the effects of anxiety on a child's everyday life?
Yeah, so this is a really big thing that I think we kind of like, I think when a child has autism, we assume that the autism is the biggest, you know, trigger to their everyday struggles, whereas often it's that secondary diagnosis of anxiety or that comorbid diagnosis of anxiety, because anxiety can be debilitating with or without autism. It really interferes with your everyday functioning, and it can affect, you know, things like how your family is able to go out and that sort of thing as well, or how your family responds to you, or what you as a family are able to do. So I think anxiety is often the place that parents ask me to start when we're talking about goals. When, you know, an autistic client may present for the first time, they often say, like, we need to start with emotional regulation and work on that anxiety, because that's our number one kind of barrier to focusing on anything else.
Yeah. I had a question. It was like in my mind just then about anxiety, but oh no, sorry. So my question to you would be, it can be so hard to sort of identify what anxiety looks like, especially for, like, if I'm thinking my situation, Jacob is non-speaking. He, especially when he was younger as well, it's like very hard to identify what is just, I guess, a choice and what is anxiety. And would it sort of present like physically for them? Or?
And that's a really good question. I think a lot of the time we assume that anxiety is that like stereotypical anxiety that we see on TV, in that, you know, kids with anxiety are quite withdrawn, they're quiet, they slip under the radar, and that's not always the case. Kids, especially when they have other stuff going on, can express their anxiety and express their worries and frustration quite externally. And it can look like they're being naughty, or it can look like a behavioural meltdown, or it can look like sensory overload. And all of that is anxiety as well, and all of that is an expression of anxiety. So again, I think it comes down to knowing that individual child and knowing what they're trying to communicate through their behavior, because every behavior that is expressed by a child is driven by an emotion, and until we figure out what emotion is, we're never going to be able to help them.
Separation anxiety so high, very behavioral when anxious, run, hide, be aggressive only towards me. Drop off tips to school. Oh, I think that was one of our questions, wasn't it?
Okay.
I think. Oh no, it wasn't. Sorry.
I think
down the list of questions.
Yeah, the best thing that we can do is liaise with the school. Like, it's very, very hard, not knowing like a child's unique situation, for me to like comment and offer tips, because anything that I suggest is going to be super general. So I would say talk to the school, have a bit of a stakeholders meeting. If you have a psychologist on board as well, maybe ask them to go to the stakeholders meeting and just come up with a plan that you guys can work on together. Yeah, I think if you have that like whole approach with everyone on the same team, that's going to be the best factor in regards to setting you up for success.
We did that with Jacob's team, and it was awesome. Like, just everyone on the same page is awesome.
Yeah, that's it. And for like everyone to like to have that, you know, like unified goal of being on the same team as well. I think those meetings, everyone kind of thinks that they're working against each other rather than working together.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what they need. That's what our kids need, is everyone on the same page. When is it time to medicate kids?
So this question is a really good one, and honestly, the answer to this question is whenever it feels right for you. Okay, so I even say to parents are like, oh, the school wants me to medicate, I'm not sure. I always say, go to the pediatrician, have the conversation. Worst case scenario, you come out with a script. It's your choice whether you guys want to fill that script, right? So just have the information so that you guys can make an informed decision. And I know that you know, sounds a bit wishy-washy, but there is no right answer here in regards to medication. I really wish the stigma around medication didn't exist. I actually get really upset when I hear people say, I'm not going to drug my child, because I truly believe that making the decision to medicate your child is a really brave decision. It's a really important decision, and it's not a decision that most families make lightly. It's a decision that you know, made to support that child, not to mute them in any way. So yeah, I wish we'd stop saying stuff like that as a general society. I know from my personal experience, my brother is autistic, and my family made the decision to medicate him during school, and it was one of the best decisions that we made in regards to his success throughout school. If it feels right for you and you feel like it may help, make sure you have a really awesome pediatrician and go for it, but it's your choice.
Yeah, I think when we were going through that process of thinking about medication, I think Jacob was around, he was probably like 4, and a lot of people were saying like, you know, he's too young. You just get that, a lot of unhelpful advice from, I think it's more of like the older generation, I feel. That's where we got it from. And it's just sort of like, it doesn't help. And especially for a parent who's making that decision to whether or not to medicate, yeah, having all these external advice,
Yeah,
just, yeah, it's a really, it makes it a really daunting experience. And as you said, I feel like that stigma shouldn't be there, because it's just like, it should just be a decision of a medication to help your child or
100.
not help your child. Like, it's just, it should be as simple as that. But
Yeah, and
like,
it should be anyone else's business. You know what I mean? Like, that's a decision for your family, and that's my decision for mine. And Godspeed, you know. Let's all say a prayer for each other on the way and hope it all works out in the end.
Yeah, it really is. Like, just think about your own family.
Yeah. Literally, if you've got with how I'm raising mine, then that says more about you than it says about me.
100%. Said so hard with NDIS to medicate as it is restraint.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a tricky kind of like grey area in regards to medication. When we're talking about PRNs, which is like when you administer a medication to help an individual, an NDIS participant, kind of like calm themselves in the moment. The restraint typically is, we're more talking about adults there. When it comes to children, and it's a medication that's taken routinely at the same day, and not to stop a behavior in the moment or not to stop a meltdown, that sort of thing, we typically don't like refer to that as a restraint. But again, sometimes it comes down to who your planner is.
Wow, I didn't even know that. I just like read that and I was like, oh, I need to say this because wow.
Yeah.
About PRNs, and that's forgive me if this doesn't make sense, but it's like when there's I don't want to say anything wrong. Like their behavior getting worse and worse, and so you administer at that point. Is that what a PRN?
Yeah. And a PRN can be a medication. It can be having to physically restrain someone. It can be having to like lock the front door to ensure they can't run out and harm themselves. You know, all those things are things you'd consider PRNs. In some cases, even having like I've worked with autistic adults before that can like undo their seatbelt and open the car door and, you know, run out into oncoming traffic because they're not really thinking in that moment. And a PRN, we've had to apply for a PRN to put the child lock on the door, and that sort of thing. So I think while obviously you want to protect every single person's human rights, sometimes it gets to the point where it's like, well, I'm actually we're trying to, like, this community is trying to save their life as well. So it can be very like tricky to navigate that kind of space.
Yeah. I've heard that's a big process with the NDIS as well.
It is not fun.
Hopefully I never navigate that, but yeah, that's hard for the families. I can just imagine like going through that and just being told like, no, that's not okay, but it's like literally like safety. Question: what age is the best age to start seeing a psychologist? My autistic son is 3.
So I think any age, I think the younger the child, the more likely it is that the psychologist will more so work with like the parents or the caregivers in that regard to help your child. They may not necessarily work with the child themselves. I have a few clients that are 3, 4, kind of that age, and some of the work is done with them, and then like parents come in and then I show them what we're working on and ask them to kind of try that stuff at home. And then other times it's purely working with the parents and I don't actually have many sessions with the child. So it kind of just depends what, I guess, your goals are or why you're considering seeking out the services of a psychologist. But in regards to being too young, you can definitely seek out the services of a psychologist and, you know, see them as parents, not necessarily have your child see them at age 3. It's totally up to you.
Yeah. And best way to support siblings of autistic children?
So this is a really good one. Obviously, I have an autistic sibling, and it was extremely challenging growing up, to say the least. My parents are amazing. They always tried their best to support me as much as they could, and they did an amazing job. But I guess for parents, it's really important to remember that your experiences as a parent of an autistic child are totally different to the experiences of a sibling, and they don't compare. So it's, even though you may think you know what the sibling is going through, you don't. So I think that's really important. So like for me, a big thing was I could never have both my parents at sport events, and sport was a very big part of my you know, school experience, and I played representative sport and that sort of thing. I could never have both parents there. There was one game that both my parents came to with my brother, and I remember it to this day because it was so important to me. So I think whenever you can, kind of like having that one-on-one time and carving out that one-on-one time with the siblings, but also really empathizing with them on what's going on and how hard this may be for them, and asking their opinion on what they think is the hardest thing, because what you are experiencing as a parent as the hardest thing may be totally different to what they're experiencing. I think as well, for me, I think I withdrew a little bit in my like early teenage years from like my brother and stuff. And don't get upset if your, you know, other children do that, because they come around in their own time. And I definitely came around in my own time. I think it was when I got my driver's license and I could start doing some things like alone with my brother, and I had a little bit more freedom. Like our relationship really started to flourish, and we're like best friends now. Like, yeah, we're awesome.
I'm actually, my brother is autistic as well, so I'm very like nodding my head at all of this.
Yeah.
So I also like, yeah, it's just dependent on the situation, the type of personality of the child. Like,
absolutely.
I know that Jazz is only 3. I just lost that just then. She's only 3. But she just, the way that she sees it now is she tells everyone, oh, Jacob doesn't speak. And she's held on to that. And, you know, we've tried to sort of navigate that sort of situation to like not have her say that as much, but I feel like that's just her way of understanding things right now. And so it's just like, okay, we'll just go with it.
It's such a good point, because I think as well, like, you know, let's say you have an autistic child and you go to speech and you go to OT and you go to psychology. For you, that's a chore. That's not a fun thing to do. For the autistic child, that may not be the most fun thing to do either. But you amp it up to them, right? So you're like, man, we're going to OT, we're going to speech. Maybe you'll get to play a game at the end. Oh my gosh, I wonder what's in the prize box today. Your other child is sitting there going, what the hell? He gets to go again one-on-one with mum or with dad or with grandma. He gets to play games, and then he gets a prize, and I just get to sit here doing nothing. So I think as well, we need to be really mindful, as they don't see it as therapy. I didn't see it as therapy. I just thought all these people were coming to my house to play with my brother, and no one wanted to play with me. You know what I mean?
Well, that's so, and it's actually, yeah, it is a realization I think we had with Jazz therapists coming in, especially when they brought like lollies or like rewards and things, and it was just like I sort of had to like make that extra effort to make sure that she felt like she was special, and it's still very, very hard to do and hard to navigate, and I guess there's no real right way to do it, but
that's it.
The last question that was pre-asked was, how do we prevent after school meltdowns after my daughter masking all day?
Yeah. So I think, again, this comes down to like your individual experiences. I obviously don't know the child that the question was about. But I think it's important to go straight from school into something that is quite calming for them. That could be like headphones in the car, their favorite music, iPad time, going straight home and jumping in a sensory tent, whatever works for them. Try and keep after school as calm as possible for a couple of hours. Don't push homework. If it doesn't work for you and that's causing a bit of a come down, don't push it. Talk to the school about what's happening at home. Let them be aware of the situation and let them know homework's not happening right now, and that sort of thing. So I think it's important to remember that kids are at school for like 6 to 8 hours. We can't expect them to come home, have half an hour of quiet time to come down from 6 to 8 hours and then be good to go. It's going to take a lot of time. So try not to have too much pressure in that time, and make sure it's, something that is calming to them, and that's going to look different for every child. Maybe deep pressure for one, it may be alone time with an iPad for another. It's going to look totally different.
Mm-hmm. Someone said 4 kids under 11 calm is a unicorn.
I feel you.
And Whitney said, after school, my room was my safe place. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever feels safe to the individual, I would really try and like push. And I think sometimes when it comes to that after school meltdown, after masking, we need to be mindful of like our expectations on the child as well. So like if you need to go run to the grocery store, maybe don't, because we know that, that may just push them over the edge. If you know something is going to be too much, it can wait, because, it's not fair on a child that's been masking all day. That's a lot.
Yeah, I think we weren't as mindful, and now are more mindful after seeing like the consequences of doing things after like that. And also like we've sort of pushed therapies to be before school and stuff like that, and it's like a navigation game, I guess. But it's definitely important for that, just like that breath of like calm after school. I know I needed it when I was in school, so I think definitely.
Yeah.
So that was all the questions that we had there. I wanted to throw the floor to you, and you can tell everyone about all your resources, your page, anything you want to speak about. It's all yours.
So I'll keep it nice and short, but basically the Playful Psychologist came from a place of, I was creating things for my clients, and like other therapists that I worked with were like, I'll pay you to do that for me, or like I'll pay for a copy of that. And I thought to myself, like, I'm making these resources for individual clients, I may as well make them available to other people as well, so that like everyone can utilize them. And I think from there I kind of started the podcast, which is an awesome free resource full of a lot of information. There's a blog where I often post like free resources, and obviously like a lot of like useful information there as well. And then from there I started creating some online workshops and online courses to really, explain things in a little bit more detail, because I guess I've found that there's only so much you can say on social media before you want to kind of like expand on that and have a platform where you can delve deeper into like the nitty gritty of certain areas. So I think I've got like a course on CBT for allied health. For ADHD as well.
Sorry, I just missed a sentence, I think. Sorry.
Oh, no.
Sentence you. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. But yeah, so there's lots of workshops, lots of resources, lots of free stuff on the website as well. And I just try and share as much as possible.
I think it's so like just being on this side of everything, long lists, the finances, the funding, wait times, all of that. It's so important to have these online avenues that you can go to and just get resources. As a parent, you're just like, I think everyone can agree with this. When you first receive that diagnosis, it's just like you're thrown into a world, especially if you have experienced it before. You're thrown into this world and you're just like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what to, like, and you just go to the internet and you research. And like, I think it's so that you have created this online space where you can get all of that information. And so, yeah, it's awesome.
I remember my mum saying, like, my younger brother is like 26 this year. So back then there wasn't the internet. Like when she wanted to read, it autism and figure out what that was. She had to go to the library and like look through books. And I guess like sometimes I'm like, I want to share things to make it easier for people because I get it. Like I get how hard this is. So even things like I had a few people saying, oh, we're so desperate to see a psychologist, but Evereye has wait lists. So I was like, okay, if you're a psychologist with no wait list in Australia, DM me right now and I'll make a highlight reel so that people can look at that. Or some people are like, oh, it's hard to know whether a psychologist is a good fit for us. So I said, like, if you've seen an awesome psychologist and you would recommend them to this community, let me know. And we created a blog post with like psych speeches and OTs worldwide and that sort of thing. And I'm constantly adding to that sort of stuff. So I guess the page and stuff is not necessarily just to buy resources. There's a lot of content that you can get like totally free of charge that doesn't even mean like downloading anything. It's just there to help you, I guess. And I think someone asked, is the podcast under the same name as my account? Yeah, it is. It's just The Playful Psychologist.
Awesome. Everyone go check her out. It's definitely will be in your favor to go get all of this information. And I did see that highlight reel just before this live and I was like, oh, that's amazing. I need to shout that out because that's messages and things about, you know, I'm obviously only in New South Wales, so it's also created that resource for everyone to just go to quickly and get recommendations. So thank you so much for coming on my live today.
It was awesome to have a nice little chat.
Yeah, it was good to get you. Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining. Bye.